Here's your engaging 900-word introduction for your YouTube video. It was supposed to be just another day at the airport. Travelers bustled through the terminal, airline staff managed the steady stream of passengers, and overhead announcements echoed through the space. But for Captain Jordan Williams, what started as a routine shift quickly turned into something he never expected. Jordan had spent years earning his wings. Countless hours of training, sacrifice, and hard work had led him to this moment. A respected commercial airline pilot, trusted to fly hundreds of passengers across the country. Dressed sharply in his crisp white uniform with gold epaulets, his pilot's cap resting perfectly on his head, he walked confidently through the terminal, ready to take command of his next flight. But just as he approached the check-in counter, something happened that left him stunned. A woman behind the desk, likely in her late 40s, glanced up from her computer screen. Her eyes scanned Jordan, lingering just a second too long, as if something didn't quite fit. She frowned slightly, then with an air of authority, gestured toward the door. "Sir, you need to wait outside," she said, her voice firm but dismissive. For a moment, Jordan thought she might be mistaking him for a passenger. It wouldn't have been the first time someone assumed he wasn't a pilot just because of how he looked. It had happened before. People questioning whether he was in the right place, asking to see his credentials even when he was in full uniform. But this time, there was something different about the way she said it. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a command. Jordan stayed calm, his years of professionalism kicking in. "I'm actually scheduled to fly this afternoon," he replied, keeping his tone even. "I'm Captain Williams. Can you check the crew roster?" The woman's expression didn't change. Instead, she sighed, clearly annoyed. "I don't have time for this. The waiting area is outside. You need to leave." At that moment, the air seemed to shift. A few passengers nearby had started paying attention. Some exchanged glances, while others pretended not to notice. But Jordan felt the weight of every pair of eyes on him. His heartbeat remained steady, but inside, frustration began to simmer. He reached into his pocket and calmly pulled out his ID badge, placing it on the counter. "You can verify my credentials," he said. "I'm not here as a passenger. I'm the pilot." The woman hesitated, glancing at the ID, but she didn't pick it up. Instead, she crossed her arms. "I'll have to check with my supervisor," she muttered, turning away. Jordan exhaled slowly, keeping his composure. He had faced challenges before, but something about this moment felt different. The way she looked at him, the way she dismissed him without even checking his name. It wasn't just an error. It was something deeper. And as much as he wanted to brush it off, he couldn't ignore the feeling that this was about more than just protocol. Minutes ticked by. The woman whispered to a colleague, glancing at Jordan occasionally. He could hear bits of the conversation, words like "doesn't look like" and "not on my list." He clenched his jaw but said nothing, knowing that any sign of frustration could be used against him. Finally, a man in a suit walked over, glancing between Jordan and the woman at the counter. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Before Jordan could respond, the woman spoke first. "He says he's a pilot, but I don't see his name on the list. I told him to wait outside." The supervisor studied Jordan for a moment before reaching for the ID badge. He examined it, then looked up. "Captain Williams," he said slowly, as if just now realizing the mistake. "You're scheduled for flight 207. Jordan nodded. "That's correct." The supervisor's face changed instantly. "I'm so sorry about the confusion," he said, turning toward the woman at the desk. "He's our pilot. There's been a misunderstanding." But the damage was already done. Jordan could see the hesitation still lingering in her expression. She didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge what had just happened. She simply turned back to her screen, as if the interaction had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Jordan wasn't looking for an apology. He had dealt with situations like this before. But something about this moment struck a nerve. He had worked too hard, dedicated too many years to his profession, to be treated like an outsider in his own workplace. And as he walked past the counter, heading toward the crew lounge, he made a decision. This wasn't going to end here. What the airline didn't know was that in just a matter of hours, the situation would escalate beyond anything they had anticipated. And by the time the day was over, Jordan wouldn't just prove he belonged, he would bring the entire company to its knees. But how did one pilot manage to turn an entire airline upside down? What happened next that left executives scrambling, employees stunned, and passengers rallying behind him? Stay tuned, because the next part of this story is where everything changes. Jordan walked away from the counter, his grip tightening around his pilot's bag. His pulse was steady, but inside, his mind raced. He had dealt with subtle dismissals before, moments where people questioned his authority, his position, his right to be where he was. But this time, it wasn't subtle. It was blatant. The woman at the counter didn't just assume, she decided. She looked at him and made up her mind before he could even say a word. He wasn't angry. At least, not yet. He had learned a long time ago that frustration wouldn't get him anywhere. He had worked too hard to let moments like this distract him. But as he entered the crew lounge, the feeling of unease didn't fade. Instead, it deepened. Inside the lounge, a few pilots and flight attendants milled around, chatting over coffee, checking schedules on their tablets. Jordan spotted his co-pilot, Ethan Carter, a tall, fair-skinned man with sharp blue eyes, sitting at one of the tables. Ethan glanced up, then grinned. "There you are," he said, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. "I was wondering where you were." Jordan sat down, setting his bag beside him. That held up at the counter. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Problem?" Jordan hesitated for a moment before answering. "They told me to wait outside." Ethan blinked, his expression shifting from confusion to something else, something like realization. He leaned forward. "You serious?" Jordan nodded. "Didn't even check my name before trying to send me out." Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. "Man, that's ridiculous." Jordan shrugged, but Ethan wasn't done. "You know, I don't get it," he said, voice quieter now. "You've been with this airline for years. You're one of the best pilots we've got. How does this still happen?" Jordan didn't answer right away. He didn't have to. The question wasn't new. Neither was the answer. A moment of silence stretched between them before Ethan spoke again. "You're reporting this, right?" Jordan considered it. He could file a complaint. He could take it to management. But would it change anything? The woman at the counter would probably get a slap on the wrist, maybe a warning. And then what? The next time he walked into an airport, it could happen all over again. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Ethan studied him, then nodded. "Well, whatever you decide, just know you've got my support." Jordan appreciated that. He and Ethan had flown together for years, built a solid trust in the cockpit. And in a field where trust meant everything, that wasn't something he took lightly. Before they could continue the conversation, a voice crackled over the intercom, calling the crew for their pre-flight briefing. Jordan pushed everything else to the back of his mind. There was a job to do, passengers to get safely to their destination. Whatever happened at the counter, whatever frustration lingered, it would have to wait. Or so he thought. As the briefing wrapped up, Jordan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and frowned. An email from corporate. The subject line was simple but carried weight. Asterisk asterisk urgent. Internal inquiry asterisk asterisk. Jordan opened it, scanning the message quickly. It was a request for a meeting. No explanation. No details. Just a location and a time, immediately after his flight. His stomach tightened. He had no idea what this was about, but the timing wasn't lost on him. He glanced at Ethan. "Something's up," he muttered, showing him the email. Ethan's brows knitted together as he read. This can't be a coincidence. Jordan didn't think so either. He had a gut feeling that whatever was happening behind the scenes had started the moment he walked into the airport that morning. Still, he had a job to do. He tucked his phone away and stood up. "Let's get in the air first," he said. "Then we'll deal with this." Ethan nodded, but Jordan could tell he was just as unsettled. They made their way to the gate, greeting the flight crew and stepping into the cockpit. Jordan settled into his seat, running through the familiar pre-flight checks. As he adjusted his headset, his gaze drifted out the windshield, scanning the busy tarmac. The airline he had dedicated years of his life to, an airline he had always taken pride in, suddenly felt different. Something was happening, and whether they were ready for it or not, the next few hours would change everything. The engines hummed beneath the cockpit, a familiar sound that usually gave Jordan a sense of control. Flying had always been his escape. Once he was in the air, nothing else mattered. But today, even at 35,000 feet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan was unusually quiet beside him, flipping switches and checking instruments with a focus that felt forced. Jordan knew he was waiting for him to say something, to bring up the email, to try to make sense of whatever was happening. But there were no answers yet, only questions. A few hours later, as they began their descent, Jordan's mind drifted back to the woman at the counter. Had she reported him? Had she spun some story about him being aggressive or unprofessional? It wouldn't be the first time someone had taken offense at a calm response just because it didn't come with an apology. As soon as they landed and taxied to the gate, Jordan and Ethan went through the usual shutdown procedures. The flight had been smooth, no turbulence, no delays. A perfect flight on paper. But as Jordan powered down the systems, he could feel something waiting for him on the ground, something bigger than a simple misunderstanding at the check-in desk. As they stepped out of the cockpit, a flight attendant, Grace, gave Jordan a sympathetic glance. She had been with the airline almost as long as he had, and he could tell she had heard something. "You good?" she asked, her voice quiet enough that only he could hear. Jordan forced a small smile. "Yeah." She nodded but didn't look convinced. As he exited the jet bridge, his phone buzzed again. Another email. Asterisk asterisk reminder. Internal inquiry. Attendance required asterisk asterisk. Jordan exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the strap of his bag. Ethan walked beside him, glancing at the screen. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered. Jordan agreed. He had been with the airline for nearly a decade, had flown thousands of hours, had a spotless record. He wasn't the kind of pilot who got called into mysterious meetings with no explanation. They reached the crew lounge, and Jordan dropped his bag onto one of the chairs. "I'll see you later," he told Ethan. "You want me to wait?" Jordan appreciated the offer, but he shook his head. "Nah, I got this." Ethan hesitated, then gave him a firm nod. "Let me know what happens." Jordan made his way to the office where the meeting was scheduled. The hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that made his pulse feel too loud in his ears. He knocked once before pushing the door open. Inside, two people sat at a sleek conference table. One was a man Jordan recognized from corporate, someone he had only seen a handful of times. The other was a woman in a navy suit, her expression unreadable. "Captain Williams," the man said, standing and gesturing to the chair across from them. Please have a seat. Jordan sat down, keeping his posture straight, his face neutral. Mind telling me what this is about? The man folded his hands on the table. There was a report filed this morning. Jordan's stomach tightened, but he didn't react. By who? The woman spoke for the first time. A customer service agent at the check-in desk. Of course. Jordan leaned back slightly. And what exactly did this report say? The man cleared his throat. That you caused a disturbance. That you were confrontational and refused to comply with airport staff instructions. Jordan stared at him for a moment, trying to keep his expression in check. He let the words settle, let the weight of them press against him. Confrontational. Disturbance. Those words were chosen carefully, and he knew why. I see, he said finally. Did the report also mention that I was asked to wait outside before I even said a word? The man and woman exchanged a glance. That was all Jordan needed to see. They already knew. He exhaled, nodding slowly. Let me guess. There's no video footage of the interaction. The woman's lips pressed together. There was an issue with the security cameras in that area this morning. Convenient. Jordan wasn't surprised, but he wasn't going to let them push him into a corner. You can check my flight record. You can check my history with this airline. I don't cause disturbances. I don't get confrontational. I showed my ID, followed protocol, and still, I was told to leave. If anything, I should be the one filing a complaint. The man adjusted his tie, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Captain Williams, we're not making any decisions today. This is just a preliminary discussion. Jordan gave him a steady look. A discussion about whether I can be trusted to do my job. The room was quiet for a few beats. Finally, the woman sighed. Look, we're just following procedure. The airline takes all reports seriously. Jordan leaned forward slightly. Good. Then I assume you'll be reviewing how often reports like this get filed against pilots who look like me. The man shifted in his seat, clearly not expecting that response. The woman, however, met Jordan's gaze without blinking. We'll be in touch, she said. Jordan stood. He knew what that meant. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As he walked out of the office, he didn't feel anger. He didn't even feel shock. He just felt tired. Tired of proving himself. Tired of being questioned. Tired of working twice as hard to be treated half as well. But if they thought he was going to let this go, they were wrong. Because what happened next would change everything. Jordan stepped out of the office, his jaw tight, his mind racing. The hallway felt longer than before, the air heavier. He had walked into that meeting expecting something frustrating, maybe even insulting. But now it was clear this wasn't just about a misunderstanding at the counter. This was something bigger. His phone buzzed again, but he ignored it for now. He needed a minute to process everything. As he made his way back to the crew lounge, his eyes swept over the terminal, watching the movement of travelers, the airport staff, the security officers stationed near the gates. It was a routine scene, but suddenly it felt different, like he was seeing things from the outside. Ethan was still there when he walked in, leaning against a counter with his arms crossed. He straightened the moment he saw Jordan's face. That bad. Jordan exhaled, shaking his head. They're reviewing a report against me. Ethan frowned. Wait, reviewing? Like this could actually go somewhere. Jordan sat down, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't know. But they made one thing clear. This isn't just about what happened at the counter. Something else is going on. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from him. All right, let's think this through. What's the worst-case scenario? Jordan met his eyes. They'd try to ground me. Maybe worse. Ethan's expression hardened. That's insane. You did nothing wrong. Jordan had thought the same thing, but he also knew that the truth didn't always matter as much as perception. And right now, someone was shaping a version of events that put him on the defensive. His phone buzzed again. This time, he checked the screen. Another email. But this one wasn't from corporate. It was from someone he hadn't expected, an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "Asterisk asterisk, you're not the only one asterisk asterisk." Jordan's pulse quickened. He opened the message. "Asterisk asterisk, Captain Williams, be careful. What's happening to you has happened before. You're being watched. Don't let them silence you asterisk asterisk." There was no name, no details, but it was enough to send a chill through him. Ethan saw the change in his expression. "What is it?" Jordan handed him the phone. Ethan read the email, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. When he finished, he let out a slow breath. "This is bad." Jordan nodded. "Yeah." Ethan set the phone down. "So what do we do?" Jordan didn't answer right away. He was still piecing it together, still trying to make sense of what was happening. But one thing was clear. If someone else had been through this, if this was part of a bigger pattern, then he couldn't just wait and see what happened next. He needed answers. He reached for his bag, pulling out his tablet. If the airline wasn't going to tell him what was going on, he'd find out himself. He started digging through internal reports, searching for anything that stood out. Ethan watched over his shoulder, silent but focused. Then Jordan found something. A list of pilots who had been placed on administrative leave over the past 5 years. Most had vague reasons attached to their suspensions: violation of conduct, internal review pending, breach of protocol. But as Jordan scanned the names, a pattern started to emerge. A pattern he recognized. Ethan saw it too. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Nearly every name on the list belonged to a pilot who had something in common with Jordan, and it wasn't their flying record. Jordan's grip on the tablet tightened. He had spent years proving himself, working harder, flying longer, doing everything by the book. And still, he had ended up here, just like the others. His phone buzzed again. Another email from the anonymous sender. This time, it was a single line. "Asterisk asterisk, check flight 227 asterisk asterisk." Jordan's heart skipped. He recognized that number. Flight 227 had been in the news months ago. A routine trip that had ended in an emergency landing due to mechanical failure. The pilot had been praised for handling the situation with skill, preventing what could have been a disaster. That pilot had also been one of the names on the list. Jordan felt the pieces clicking into place, but the picture they formed was unsettling. Someone was targeting pilots. And if this pattern held, he was next. Ethan looked at him. "We have to do something." Jordan nodded slowly. "Yeah, we do." But whatever was happening here, it wasn't just about him anymore. And whoever was behind it wasn't going to let him walk away without a fight. Jordan sat motionless, staring at his phone screen. His mind was racing, but he forced himself to stay calm. Flight 227. He hadn't thought about it in months, but now everything about it felt too important to ignore. A perfectly capable pilot had been removed from duty after saving an entire flight. And now Jordan was being set up in a way that felt eerily similar. Ethan leaned in. "Okay, this just got a lot bigger. Whoever sent that email knows something." Jordan exhaled, trying to push away the frustration bubbling inside him. "We need more than a name on a list. We need proof." Ethan nodded. "Maybe the pilot from 227, Captain Harris, right? Maybe he'll talk." Jordan hesitated. Harris had gone silent after the investigation into the emergency landing. No interviews, no follow-ups. The airline had quietly phased him out, and no one had questioned it. If he had tried to fight back, he hadn't been loud enough to make a difference. Still, there was only one way to find out. Jordan grabbed his phone and searched for Harris's contact information. It was a long shot, but he had to try. He hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then, to his surprise, someone picked up. Ethan nodded. Maybe the pilot from 227, Captain Harris. Right. Maybe he'll talk. Jordan hesitated. Harris had gone silent after the investigation into the emergency landing. No interviews, no follow-ups. The airline had quietly phased him out, and no one had questioned it. If he had tried to fight back, he hadn't been loud enough to make a difference. Still, there was only one way to find out. Jordan grabbed his phone and searched for Harris's contact information. It was a long shot, but he had to try. He hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then, to his surprise, someone picked up. A voice, deep and careful. "Who is this?" "Captain Harris." Jordan kept his tone steady. "My name is Jordan Williams. I fly for the same airline you used to work for." Silence. Jordan pressed on. "I think I'm about to go through what happened to you. I need to know the truth." More silence. Then finally, Harris sighed. "You shouldn't have called me." Jordan sat up straighter. "Why not?" Harris let out a humorless chuckle. "You think this is just about one bad report. One misunderstanding at the check-in desk. It's bigger than that, Williams. They're picking us off." Jordan's grip on the phone tightened. "Why?" Harris hesitated. Then, in a near whisper, he said, "Because they're covering something up." Jordan exchanged a look with Ethan, who was hanging on to every word. "What are they covering up?" Harris' voice became even quieter, as if he were afraid someone was listening. "The maintenance logs. The safety records. They've been changing reports, altering inspections. The flight you just landed, do you really think everything on that plane was perfect?" Jordan's pulse pounded. He had trusted the pre-flight checks, the system, the regulations. But if Harris was right, then the real danger wasn't him. It was what he had been unknowingly flying. And now he was in the way. Harris exhaled. "I tried to expose it. Thought I could fight it. That's why they pushed me out. You still have time to walk away." But Jordan wasn't going to walk away. He had seen too much, knew too much. And now the stakes weren't just about his career. They were about the lives of everyone who stepped onto those planes, trusting that they were safe. "I can't let this go," Jordan said. Harris sighed again. "Then be careful, because if you push too hard, they won't just take your job. They'll make sure you never fly again." The call ended. Jordan lowered the phone slowly, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. Ethan leaned forward. "What did he say?" Jordan looked him dead in the eye. "We're not just dealing with discrimination. We're dealing with a cover-up." Ethan sat back, shaking his head. "You think they'll come after you next?" Jordan didn't even need to answer. He knew the answer. And he knew they had just run out of time. Jordan didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind replayed Harris's words. The maintenance logs. The altered inspections. The quiet removals of pilots who had asked too many questions. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the passengers who unknowingly stepped onto those planes every single day. And if what Harris said was true, they were all at risk. By morning, Jordan had made a decision. If the airline wanted to push him out, they'd have to do it in the open. No quiet suspension, no silent dismissal. He was going to expose the truth. Ethan had already been up, making calls, digging through records. When Jordan walked into the crew lounge, Ethan slid his laptop toward him. "You're not going to believe this." Jordan scanned the screen. It was an internal report, a routine maintenance check on one of the airline's aircraft from just 2 months ago. The official version said everything was in working order. But the original version, the one buried in the system, told a different story. A critical issue with the hydraulic system. One that hadn't been fixed. One that could have led to disaster. Jordan clenched his jaw. How many more? Ethan pulled up another file, then another, and another. The pattern was clear. Someone had been signing off on unsafe planes, covering up problems, and letting them fly anyway. And now Jordan was in the perfect position to expose it. His next flight was in a few hours. He was scheduled to captain a routine cross-country route, a flight like any other. But this time, he had something no one expected. Proof. Ethan leaned in. "If you do this, they'll come at you with everything they've got." Jordan nodded. "I know." But this wasn't about his career anymore. This was about the lives of every passenger who stepped onto those planes, trusting that they were safe. And it was about every pilot who had been silenced before him. He grabbed his bag, his heart pounding, but his mind clear. Let's go. At the airport, everything felt the same, but Jordan knew it wasn't. Every step he took felt heavier. Every glance from an airline official more pointed. They knew. Or at least they suspected. As he walked through the terminal, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. A calm voice spoke. "Captain Williams, we strongly suggest you reconsider your next steps." Jordan didn't stop walking. "Who is this?" The voice remained steady. "A friend. You have a future in this industry, but only if you make the right choice." Jordan's grip tightened around his phone. And what's the wrong choice? A pause. Then quietly, getting on that plane. The call ended. Jordan exhaled sharply. It was exactly what he had expected. A warning. A threat. But it was too late to turn back. He reached the gate, greeted the crew, and prepared for takeoff. But just before boarding, he made one final move. He pulled out his phone, attached every single document Ethan had found, and sent them to every major news outlet in the country. Then for good measure, he sent them directly to aviation safety regulators and law enforcement. By the time the flight was in the air, the truth would already be out. He stepped onto the plane, feeling a strange sense of calm. No matter what happened next, he had already won. But just as he was about to enter the cockpit, a voice called out behind him. "Captain Williams, step aside." He turned to see two uniformed security officers standing at the entrance. Behind them, a senior airline executive he recognized too well. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You won't be flying today." Jordan looked past him, out into the terminal. On the TV screens mounted on the walls, breaking news alerts flashed. Asterisk asterisk whistleblower pilot exposes airline safety, scandal asterisk asterisk. The airline had acted fast, but Jordan had acted faster. And now the whole world was watching. For a brief moment, there was silence. Jordan stood at the entrance of the plane, his heart steady as he looked at the airline executive blocking his path. The two security officers beside him weren't moving yet, just watching, waiting for the signal. Jordan knew exactly what was happening. They were trying to make this quiet, to get him out of the airport before things spiraled out of their control. But it was already too late for them. From the corner of his eye, he saw passengers in the terminal staring at the TV screens. Whispers spread. Phones came out. People were recording. The news had broken faster than even he expected. The executive's smile didn't waver, but Jordan could see the tension in his eyes. "Captain Williams," he said, keeping his voice low, "let's not make a scene." Jordan met his gaze. "I think it's already too late for that." The man's jaw tightened. He glanced at the security officers, but before he could give them an order, a commotion erupted behind him. Airport staff, other pilots, flight attendants, people were gathering, watching, whispering to each other. Ethan was among them, standing near the boarding area, his phone still in his hand. He had been recording everything. Then, as if a switch had flipped, someone spoke up. A flight attendant, one of Jordan's colleagues. "We stand with Captain Williams." "Oh." And then, as if conceding defeat, the executive gave Jordan one last look. A silent warning. "This isn't over." Then he turned and walked away. The security officers followed. Jordan exhaled slowly. It was over. At least the first part. The flight didn't take off that day. The airline was in full damage control mode, trying to contain the fallout. But there was no stopping it. News outlets were already digging deeper into the scandal. Former employees, mechanics, even passengers were coming forward with their own experiences. Within days, federal investigators had launched an inquiry into the airline's safety practices. Lawsuits were filed. Executives resigned. Stock prices plummeted. And Jordan, he became the face of it all. Not because he wanted to, but because the truth had to come from someone. Ethan stayed by his side, helping him navigate the whirlwind of interviews and legal meetings. Captain Harris finally spoke out, backing up everything Jordan had exposed. Other pilots came forward too, refusing to stay silent any longer. There was no instant justice, no overnight change. But the world was watching now. The airline couldn't hide behind closed doors anymore. Regulations were tightened. Planes were properly inspected. And most importantly, passengers were safer because of it. As for Jordan, his flying career came to a halt, at least temporarily. The airline suspended him, officially calling it an ongoing review process. But the industry had already taken notice. Other airlines reached out, offering opportunities with companies that actually valued safety and integrity. One evening, weeks after everything had unfolded, Jordan sat in his apartment, looking out at the city's skyline. His phone buzzed. It was an email from an airline he had always admired, offering him a captain's position. A fresh start. A place where he could do what he loved without compromising his principles. He smiled to himself, setting the phone down. He had fought the battle he needed to fight. And now he was ready for whatever came next.